bastard with trick questions, so you're right to be cautious. If something like that comes up, email me and I will clarify. Okay, so as it says on Sesame Street, asking questions is a good way to find things out. I will have a look at that one. If you send me an email to remind me, and I will see if you've got a case. No, that's a fair one. Yeah, so if you ever have questions like that, don't be afraid to ask. I'm not going to say, how dare you ask, and I'm docking 10 points for the temerity. All right. Okay, so last time we started talking about diagramming arguments. And we learned about dependent and independent premises, and we learned about how to diagram each of them. There is one thing in the book that I want to draw your attention to, or to which I want to draw your attention. And that is this pernicious diagram right here. Here you see an example of a single proposition with multiple arrows going from it. Now, there is nothing wrong with a single proposition with multiple arrows going to it. That, in fact, is very common in larger arguments. That is just an example of something being supported independently by several different reasons. That's okay. But now, technically, this is okay in this respect. If you have a general proposition, it does support different individual particular propositions. So, for example, if this were to say, all lawyers are dishonest, and then this said Larry the lawyer is dishonest, and this said Lisa the lawyer is dishonest, and this said Lenny the lawyer is dishonest, well, yes, the general claim all lawyers are dishonest would support each of those. However, for the purposes that we're using these diagrams, this will never happen. You will never have multiple arrows going from a single proposition. Okay, so regard this as a misleading part of your textbook. We will only ever have arrows converging on something, not arrows diverging. All right. With that in mind, well, we already looked at this one, and actually with each of these test questions, this is on page 98, 99, basically the only difficulty is working, except for number 5, the only difficulty is working out what the conclusion is. Then when you worked out the conclusion, the rest falls into place. So that's a bit too easy, so let's skip ahead to page 104, practice quiz 5.4. Let's start somewhere. Samantha, let's start with you. Number 1. What is an ocelot? What's that? Yeah, it's actually a big cat. Well, not especially big. Haven't they crossbred them with domesticated cats to produce something rather beautiful? They have kind of a cloudy spots. So now there are, what are they called?
They're savannas or servals or something like that.
Serval,
I believe it's a savannah. They're like relatively large breed, behave like dogs.
And they're ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, well there you go.
Stand like
Exactly.
this tall.
Good God.
Yeah.
Yeah, well I didn't think even purebred ocelots were that big, but yeah, so it's a rare cat. You're not really supposed to keep it as a pet. Is anyone familiar with the animated show Archer? Yeah, the secretary who's actually secretly very wealthy, turns out she owns an ocelot. All right, everybody should be familiar with the animated show Archer, unless you're easily offended, but it is fine. All right, how many propositions, Samantha, are there in that? 2. So Annette must be wealthy. Last week, now remember, today we're gonna go through the process of actually diagramming a fairly large argument. The arguments on the sheet that you picked up, for example. We'll certainly get to the first one. We probably won't finish the second one because it's pretty huge. And so we need to establish the guidelines for diagramming something like that, which we can apply to this one even though it's very small. First distinction I want to make, and I don't think I explicitly made this last time, is that every argument can be divided, can be analyzed into content and form. Okay, and this corresponds nicely to the 2 elements of diagramming an argument. The first element of diagramming an argument is a numbered list of propositions.
Content.
So, what's that?
Content.
That's the content, right. So the numbered list of propositions is, so in this case it would be 1, Annette must be wealthy, and 2, last week
Annette bought a diamond choker.
Annette bought a diamond choker for her ocelot. Now it says she bought a diamond choker, but one of the things I want you to do when you're listing the propositions is make sure every proposition in your list is a standalone, context-independent sentence. So, I mean, you could give an entire argument in a single run-on sentence. You could give a single run-on sentence with lots of ands that contain 20 propositions. You would just have one sentence. But for each of the propositions, when you write it down in the list, I want it to be a grammatically correct standalone sentence. So it should be a sentence in its own right, and also you should remove context-sensitive words like he, she, that, who, whose meaning you only know because of the context it was in before you wrote it out as its own sentence. So it has to be standalone. So for this, in this case, instead of writing 2, last week she bought a diamond choker, you would write last week Annette bought a diamond choker. Okay, so far. All right, so that's the context. The content is a list of propositions that tells you what the argument is actually about. This one is about Annette and her ocelot. What is the form? The form, the logical form of an argument is the logical structure. What does that mean? Well, that will become more clear the further we get into the class. But for the purposes of this chapter, the logical form is indicated by the diagram. And the diagram tells you what supports what. So for example, we'd say, here we've given the content, Annette must be wealthy, and 2, last week, she bought a diamond choker for her ocelot. That's the list, and then you use the numbers that you've come up with here to do the diagram. It's going to be a pretty simple diagram. But first thing you have to do, once you've got your list, the next thing you have to do, the first part of diagramming the form, is to work out what?
The conclusion?
Yes. Always, always, once you've got your list of propositions, the very first thing you do is find the conclusion. And you have to be careful about this, because if you get that wrong, your entire diagram will be wrong. So, what is the conclusion in this case?
Annette must be wealthy.
Annette must be wealthy. Who agrees? How do you know?
Because the second sentence supports.
Yeah, in other words, it's kind of obvious. And with luck, that's true in most cases. In other words, you have kind of a logical sense. All of us have, to differing degrees, a built-in logical intuitions. We can tell that the second one is meant to be evidence for the first one. Now, one more thing about, actually I've got a handout on this, if you go to the handout buttons on Blackboard, that lists these steps nicely. But when you write out the propositions, First of all, you've got to replace all of the words like he, she with what they refer to, but also you must omit certain kinds of words. What words must you omit? Kind of words we talked about last time that they have a little box of on page something. What's that? What are they called?
Indicator.
Indicator words. That's right. Indicator words. Now, what indicator words indicate is what's the premise and what's the conclusion. So they are indicators of the conclusion. What kind of words were indicators of the conclusion? Therefore. What would be an indicator word for the premises? Since, because, yes. Okay, so those words, they're not actually part of the content of the argument. They're not what the argument is about. What they tell you is they hint at the logical form, because they tell you what is meant to support what. Now, if there, it's not exactly clear that these are indicator words, but if you had to say there were indicator words in this first one, what would they be? Must. Yes, the word must, and it must be wealthy. Why are you saying must? Because you're about to give evidence that proves it. She must be wealthy in light of this fact. In other words, the evidence for the claim that she is wealthy is this. So, strictly speaking, you should probably write the first proposition as Annette is wealthy. And omit must because that's sort of an indicator word. But in most cases, the indicator words or phrases are more obvious than that. Okay, so far. All right, so the conclusion is number 1. So the diagram is pretty dang simple. There you go. 2 leading to 1. Conclusion at the bottom, premise supporting it. Okay? And because there's only one premise, what kind of premise is it? There are 2 kinds of premises. What are the 2 kinds? Dependent and independent. Because there's only one, it has to be independent. It's very independent. It's on its own. All right. Let's up the complexity a little. Who's here? Jordan. Number 2.
I don't think it would be a good idea to take the American Revolution course this term because it conflicts with the course I need for my major.
Which is philosophy, of course.
And my schedule would have been more balanced if I took a science course instead.
All right. How many propositions have we got there?
3 minutes.
Well, let's go through them and work it out. What's the first one?
I don't think it would be a good idea to take the American Revolution course this term.
You threw your voice there, Jordan. Yes. Yes, I don't think it would be a good idea to take the American Revolution course this term. If we were to say that there were indicator, well, for now we'll pass over that one. What's the second proposition? Still with you.
The course I need for my major.
What am I going to object to in what you said?
The American Revolution course conflicts with the course.
Yes, you used the word it, and of course the content, what the word it refers to, you know that when you see it in context, but you've got to be able to state it out of context. So the American Revolution course conflicts with the course I need for my major. Finally,
My schedule would have more balance if I took a science course instead.
yes, so you don't need the conjunction there. That's another way to tell you that that's a place where we're going to divide it really into 2 propositions. So my schedule would have more balance if I took a science course instead of the American Revolution course. That one is, if you didn't do that, I wouldn't be too upset. But there is the implication. If you use the word instead, you're comparing it to something. And of course you know what the something is when you see it in this context, but you wouldn't if it was all by itself. All right, 3 propositions. What is the conclusion? Everybody. Number 1, 2, or 3? 1. Anyone disagree? How do you know that's the conclusion?
It's an asserted statement followed by because.
Yeah, actually, if something is followed by because is an indicator word for a premise. So what comes after the because is a premise, but what comes before the because is going to be the conclusion. Also, I don't think it would, I don't think, why don't you think? Well, you're about to give the reasons. So I don't think it works a bit like must. It's, the reason why you don't think is this other stuff. So really the first proposition would be, it wouldn't be a good idea to take the American Revolution course this term, because nobody should take history of American courses. That's the obvious reason. It just gives people bad ideas about secession. The American Revolution course conflicts with the course I need for my major. That's number 2. My schedule would have more balance if I took a science course instead of this American Revolution course. So number 1 is the conclusion. All right. Now, there are how many possible, given that number 1 is the conclusion, there are how many possible diagrams? Wrong. We did this last time. How many diagrams did I draw? 4. That's right. The 2 that you're thinking of are these 2, but what are the other alternatives? 3, 2, 1, or
2, 3, 1.
2, 3, 1. Yes. Okay. A, B, C, D. Chorus. What's the right one?
A.
I kind of scared. A. Nobody wants to say B, or C, or D. All right. Why is it A? Because they're independent. Yes. In other words, the fact that it conflicts with a course for your major is a separate and independent reason from more balance to your schedule, whatever that means. Okay, good. I'm not going to have you do number 4 because we ran into difficulties with it in my previous class, but I will point out the difficulties because I think it's educational. So, Ken, read number 4 for us.
Key West, the southernmost city in the continental United States, is located at the tip of the Florida Peninsula. This means not only that it enjoys year-round warm weather, but also that it is vulnerable to Caribbean hurricanes.
And you have to listen to Jimmy Buffett all the time. Okay, now, how many propositions are in the first sentence? Just 1? Anyone, any advance on 1?
2.
Why would you say 2?
Is the southernmost city and
Its actual geographic location.
Yeah, so you're sort of stating 2 facts there. You're stating that it's the southernmost and you're stating where it is, you know, on the continental United States. Now, so normally we would split that into 2. But the trouble arises with the first word of the next sentence. What is the first word and what do I mean? This. Okay, normally I don't allow you to write this, right? You have to write what the this refers to. What does the this refer to?
the whole thing?
The whole thing. So in other words, it refers to both of them. So, well, does it refer to both of them? Is it referring to both of them at once, or is it referring to the fact that it's the southernmost? Or is it referring to, it's unclear. So that I don't want us to diagram this from partly because it is unclear, but it's educational in this respect. And this is a lesson that applies to writing courses, which of course this is not a writing course, but I have to grade a lot of papers, and I'm going to use the word, this is something that drives me crazy. Starting a sentence with the word this. Because usually what the this is unclear. Vague. We skipped over number 3, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Actually, that's also interesting. So we will see an example of where the reference of a word can be kind of abstract. But when you start a sentence with this, it's always bad. Don't do it. Okay? It's like begging the question. Don't use begging the question. Don't start a sentence with this. Remember these things. You will be a better person Your professors will love you. All right. So Ken, I'm going to draft you to do number 3 now.
Everyone needs to understand how the structure of language can affect the way we think. But since this is difficult to appreciate in the case of our native language, it is valuable to study a foreign language.
All right. How many propositions have we got there? 3, said somebody. 3 it is. All right. So what's the first one, Ken?
Everyone needs to understand how the structure of language can affect the way we think.
Yes. What's the second one? And I'm going to make a noise if I disapprove of the word you're saying. I don't mind those.
Everyone needs to understand how the structure of language can affect the way we think is difficult to appreciate in the case of our native language.
You were avoiding pissing me off, but you went a little too far. In other words, what you were trying to do was you were trying to avoid using the word this, right? Because
Yes.
you knew that I would make an embarrassing sound if you did. However, what you just revealed is that what the this is referring to is hard to pin down. Who thinks they've got exactly what the this refers to?
The effect of the structure of language on the way we think is difficult to appreciate in the case of our native language.
Yes, or you could keep it in the way that it says it. So, how the structure of language can affect the way that we think is difficult to appreciate. Now, what you might think is it's just referring to the structure of language, or the way we think. That's all unclear because of the use of the word this. See the problem with the word this? It's a bad, bad word. All right, but yes, if you were going to do it right, you did miss out since, which is good. Why did you miss out the word since?
It's an indicator.
It's an indicator word, so we don't include it in our propositions. So, first proposition, everyone needs to understand how the structure of language can affect the way we think. Second proposition, it is difficult to appreciate how the structure of language can affect the way we think in the case of our native language. Third proposition.
It is valuable to study a foreign language.
Yeah, I mean, at this point you're probably gun shy about the word it, but it's okay in this case. It's like, it's not referring to anything. It's like we use it often to refer something, but there are these weird constructions in English where it doesn't refer to anything, like it is raining. What is the it? What is the it that is raining? There is nothing. No, it's just a way of saying rain is happening. Okay, and that's what's happening here. What's the conclusion then? 1, 2, or 3? Everybody? 3. Some uncertainty there. Yes, that's right. What's the point of this is arguing that it's valuable to study a foreign language. Okay, now, assuming this is 3 instead of 1, what's it going to look like? A, B, or C? We'll omit D, because I'm just talking about whether or not there's 2 independent, 2 dependent, or 1 leading to the other. A, B, or C? Everybody?
C.
Wrong. Try again.
B.
B. Why is this wrong? Well, I will explain. If this was the right one, remember the way to test whether or not your diagram is right. And the way to test is to say the conclusion first. So in this case, it's valuable to study a foreign language. What do you think would be the immediate reason?
Number 2.
So it's difficult to appreciate how the structure of language can affect the way we think in the case of our native language. Okay, it's difficult to appreciate how the structure of language can affect the way we think in the case of our native language. Therefore, you should study a foreign language. That does look okay, except imagine I were to say, why should I care about that? Why should I care about how the structure of language affects the way we think? I don't give a crap, right? So you're not giving me a reason to study a foreign language. I mean, it's difficult to appreciate how our language divides up concepts in the case of our native language. But if I don't care about that, that's not a reason for me to study a foreign language. But nonetheless, if this was the right diagram, then the remaining one would be a reason for this one. So I'd be able to say, it's difficult to appreciate how the structure of language affects the way we think in the case of our native language. What's your evidence for that? The evidence for that is everybody needs to understand how the structure of language can affect the way we think. Is that right? No. This is definitely funny. This does not support this. So that's why it's not that one. And it is in fact B. And actually that is a common mistake to make, is to confuse something being a reason for this one with something working with it to support the conclusion. And perhaps that is something to do with confusion about what is meant by the idea of a dependent premise. Well, in which of these diagrams are there dependent premises? A, B, or C? Everybody? Dependent premises. Only B. Only B has dependent premises. How do you tell a dependent premise on a diagram? Because of the plus. What is the definition of dependent premise without looking at your notes? When is a premise dependent?
But it can't prove a point by itself, I guess.
That's right. Here is the wrong thing to say, so it'll probably be what you remember. Here is the wrong thing to say. It needs support. Okay? It's dependent. It's like a codependent person. They need support. No. Dependent premises don't need support. This would be an example of something that needs support, obviously, because it's getting support. But dependent premises don't need support. They don't necessarily need proving. Like, for example, we saw an example involving dependent premises last time. It was like about a kid. Now the name Alice is stuck in my head for reasons that will become clear, but let's use the word Alice. Alice is a very bright child. She started speaking before the age of 1, and most children don't speak until much later. Now that was an example of dependent premises. But notice one of them, Alice started speaking before the age of 1. Does that need proving? No, you would just, I'm not lying. I kept track of it. It's not really something that needs proving. You might say, well, that is remarkable, but, take my word for it. So, dependent premise doesn't necessarily need support or need proving. It can be totally reliable and totally acceptable. But what it means is it cannot support the conclusion by itself. It might be a rock-solid fact that everyone agrees and not needing proving, but it doesn't by itself support the conclusion. It isn't obviously relevant to the conclusion without something else. Okay? So for example here, why are they dependent? Well, you can't appreciate this phenomenon, how the structure of language affects the way we think, in the case of your native language. Well, I don't care. Well, but you need this extra point. Everybody needs to understand that. Oh, okay, well if everybody needs to understand it, and you can't appreciate it in the case of your native language, well that is a reason to study a foreign language. So they are dependent on each other. But one doesn't prove the other. They just need both of each other before they support the conclusion. Does that make sense? Okay. The rest of them are boring. Let's look at this one. Okay, let's start with the shorter one. I've been using this for years, and now it's the Turtles' time again. They're in a hit movie again. Did anyone see it? Oh yes, you did. You just won't admit it. Which is probably the right decision. Somebody went to see it. It made a boatload of money. All right. The first thing you do is you go through and you write out a numbered list of all the propositions. Do that now, and then get back to me before we draw the diagram. Did somebody take the one with the propositions written out on it by mistake? Yes, that was it. Okay. Swap. Yeah. You could probably stop the video for now. Yeah, if I was to quibble, what words might I suggest you omit? Well, no, not in this case. Well, not only.
It is obvious that.
It is obvious that. Why might I omit those?
Indicators.
Because they're indicators. We'll get back to that. So that's why I've drawn a line through them here. Number 2, Jamie.
Because Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile in the Teenage Mutant
Tip, stop. All right. First thing, what word am I going to ask Jamie to omit? Because. That's another indicator. All right. Now you are going too far. You are bleeding into the next proposition. So what is the what is the next proposition? Single proposition. So after the word, no, Jamie, after the word because.
Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile.
There you go. Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. I don't know how they tell this. You know, CSI is wonderful. Obviously there's some kind of flakes of reptile skin embedded in dents that could only be made by karate. Hunter. All right, next one.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who are Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael, are the only reptiles who practice karate.
Yes.
I split that up into 2 different.
And you should indeed, yes. That one's tricky because one is nested inside the other, but they are in fact 2 separate facts. I don't mind which order you put them in, but they need to be separated. So they are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the only reptiles who practice karate, or karate, as I believe they say. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael. The only way many people have heard of those names.
So there should be 4?
What's that?
So there should be 4? Or just different?
Now, yes, so you might say, well, wait a minute, there's actually, you could divide that, Michelangelo is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. But actually, the fact that we're interested in is that they're the only ones. If I just said Michelangelo, suppose I replace this claim, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael, with these four claims. Michelangelo is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, Leonardo is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, Donatello, you get it. That doesn't actually capture the information that we want. Why not?
Doesn't tell us that those 4 are all of the Teenage Mutant Ninja
Right.
Turtles.
So this tells us that that's all there are. There's only 4 of them. It's amazing that they're able to do so much, especially with one of them being a party dude. All right. Number 5. Brandon. I heard knuckles cracking. I cannot hear that again.
Just want to read
The next proposition after that one.
Shredder's
Assailant.
could not have been Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello.
Yes. Now again, that's right. Now in this case, you don't have to. In another context, you would have to. The reason why, the case where you would have to split it up is if there were different reasons for each of them. So for example, if I said, we know it wasn't Michelangelo because he was in jail at the time. We know it wasn't Donatello because he was passed out drunk. We know it wasn't Raphael. We know it wasn't Leonardo because, I don't know, he was off fighting somebody else at the time. If there were distinct reasons, then you would have to separate this out, because you would only have the reason for Michelangelo pointing to it not being Michelangelo. But as it turns out, there is a single reason for all three of them, so you don't have to break it up. Let's keep it simple if we can. Okay, and that single reason is number 6, Zeno?
Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Donatello were in a newsmaker interview with Avril O'Neil at the time of the assault.
Played by Megan Fox in the new movie, so I thought she had to have red hair. I don't know. It's like, not sure I approve of that casting. All right. Yes, that's right. Number 7. Jacob.
Those turtles, well, that was the last one that was just read. Raphael must have assaulted Shredder.
Yes. And we can take out the words must have because they are indicators. Now, here's a tricky part. What does "it is obvious that" appear to be an indicator for? A conclusion, right? Because it's obvious that it was this because of reasons. But what does must have seem to be an indicator for? Also the conclusion. It looks like we've got 2 conclusions. But that can't be. In a single argument, there can only be one conclusion. Yes?
Last time we talked about a sub-conclusion.
Yes, one of them is going to be supported by others, but not because it's the overall conclusion, but because it is a sub-conclusion. Okay, so one of them is going to be the overall conclusion, and the other one is going to be a sub-conclusion. Which of them is the overall conclusion? 7. Why is that the overall conclusion?
The particular Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle that assaulted Shredder.
Yes, it's the point of the whole thing. Okay. So, once you have, so this is the content of the argument. This is what it is about. Then you draw a diagram. Now, notice that the form and content are distinct. This can be the form of any number of arguments. What is this argument about?
It's about 1.
No, it's not about 1. Well, no, that is the one is the conclusion. Yes, but what is this argument about? Like giraffes, lawnmowers? What is it about? You don't know, right? Why not?
That only shows the structure.
Because the form isn't what the argument is about. That's the content, and this just shows the form. This shows the logical structure. Okay, we've given the content here, what the argument is about. Now we want the logical structure. Well, the first thing you do once you finish your list, what is the first thing you do? You find the conclusion. And you better damn well get it right. Because if you get the wrong conclusion, that screws up your entire diagram. So be careful. But in this case, it is number 7. So then at the bottom of your space for diagramming, you put 7. And if you like, you put a line through it so that you know, well, I've diagrammed that one, now I just have 6 to go. All right, this one actually, although there's only 7, and I say only 7 because contrast that with over the page, where there are, well, you can work that out, a lot more than 7. It is actually slightly tricky. So let's get you started. How do we know? Perhaps the best way to do it is to work backwards from the conclusion. So, this argument supposedly proves that it's Raphael. How do we know it's Raphael?
Because he's the only one who wasn't with them.
Wait a minute, wait. He's the only one who wasn't with who?
With the 3 other turtles.
Why do I care about that? Just because he wasn't hanging out with his friends doesn't prove he assaulted Shredder.
Because of the sub-conclusion.
It was
One of the
one of
turtles
the-
killed Shredder.
Assaulted him. He's still alive. Unfortunately, because there's going to be a sequel, I assume. Yes, it's certainly one immediate evidence relevant is that it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But wait a minute, suppose I say it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Why should my client Raphael care about that? Because after all, they wear masks and he's not wearing a mask. So you can't tell that it was him. So obviously this is going to be relevant, but that by itself does not prove that it's Raphael. So we can't have just this, 1 leading to 7. That's not going to work. It's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, therefore it's Raphael. That's a huge leap. You're going to need more. What else do you need?
2, 3,
4. Well, that's a lot. Probably more than you need.
We need 1 plus 4 plus 5 to arrive at 7.
So 1 is it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. 4 is a list of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that includes 4. That is 4 including Raphael. Ah, now we're getting somewhere. So it's one of them, and they are this 4. But that by itself doesn't prove that it's Raphael because there's 4 of them. So we need one more thing. That it was not the other 3, which is which number? 5. 5 is the one that says that it couldn't have been those 3. All right, finish the diagram.
Is this going to be one diagram?
Yes, 1 argument, 1 diagram. Everything in its place. All right, you could probably pause the tape. The diagram, yes. Oh, good chalk action. Wait a minute. You don't need a line there. You only need a line underneath. Okay, there you go. All right, you're not done yet. Why not?
Because I'm still missing 2 and 3.
Right. So include 2 and 3. You're just going to add them on, aren't you?
Well, I don't think, can you?
Well, you can, but you shouldn't in this instance.
Could you do like from the side?
Yeah, sure. If they could be independent reasons.
Okay. Give it a shot, yeah.
Yes.
Hold on.
Is that right?
All right. Let's go over that. Thank you. All right. So, if this was an independent reason for this, then you could say the conclusion, which is Raphael assaulted Shredder, and you could say, well, what's your evidence? Shredder was karate chopped by a reptile. Now that by itself is not evidence that Raphael assaulted Shredder. Because for all we know, there are millions of reptiles who practice karate. Snakes, turtles, all kinds of things. All right, so that one doesn't really belong there. Anyone got an alternative diagram? Okay, Ken. Okay. All right, thank you. Now, if this is the right diagram, then Raphael it was Raphael who assaulted Shredder. How do we know? Well, it was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles who assaulted Shredder. Okay. And what's number 5? It wasn't Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello. Do those 2 facts alone prove that it's Raphael? No. For one thing, what doesn't it say?
Doesn't say that.
Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello.
Well, it does, doesn't it? It says number 5 is Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello couldn't have assaulted Shredder. So it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it wasn't those 3. If I'm Raphael's defense lawyer, I would say, well, so what? That's got nothing to do with my client, because you haven't shown what? You haven't shown that he's one of the Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? And furthermore, so what is the one that we need as well? 4, because that includes him in the list. Now, it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They are these 4, and it wasn't those 3. If all of those are true, does that guarantee that it's Raphael? Yes. So so if we move 4 down here, this stage is right. Now we just have to put these 3 in the place. Who got that as the first stage? Good. So if you think about it, yeah, so it's one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They are these 4, including Raphael. It wasn't, they are these 4, including Raphael, and it wasn't the other 3. Put those 3 facts together, and it proves that it's Raphael. But, of course, being a good defense lawyer, I'm going to say, well, how do you know it was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? What's the answer? He was karate chopped by a reptile. So what? That by itself doesn't prove that it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Many reptiles may know karate.
And they are the only reptiles who do that.
Yes, and if they're the only ones who know karate, so if he was karate chopped by a reptile and they're the only reptiles who know karate, that does prove. Put the 2 together and it proves that it was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, done. Alright, so we just have 6 left. 5, we could say, how do you know it wasn't Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello? What's your evidence? They were in an interview at the time. So that is the correct diagram. Anyone get that? Well done. You can pat yourself on the back. Of course, you did this before, but it was a while ago. All right. Yeah. Let's go through. Let's turn over and just work our way through the propositions for the Alice one. Oh, sure. I took your sheet. Oh, there you go. All right. Let's see. Where did we get to? Cat, I think. Could you read, what is the first proposition in this argument?
Alice should not have been found guilty.
Well, it should be found not guilty. Yeah, the position of the not is important. Should not be found guilty is not the same as should be found not guilty. Yes, Alice should be found not guilty. Okay, number 2, Jet.
Alice did not rob the Key West convenience store at 10 on August 9th.
Yeah, somebody pointed out to me for the first time in my using this, and I've used this many, many, many times, that actually you should probably separate out the information given there that Alice did not commit the crime. The crime was committed, or the crime was robbing a convenience store, and it was committed at that time. The information is sort of stated in that single one the way I've done it. And it's probably better to separate it out. But I'm going to run with it this time. Partly because the information of when the time of the crime was is relevant to one of the reasons why it is argued it isn't her. Alright, but we'll leave it as stated. Number 3, Josh.
She had no motive.
I'm sorry.
Alice had no motive.
Thank you. Alice had no motive. Now you missed out the words in the first place. Why?
They're indicators.
Yes, they're indicator words. They actually tell you that there are going to be a cluster of reasons, and this is the first cluster. But it's not actually part of the content of the argument. Alice had no motive. Ethan?
Alice did not need the money, or did not need money.
Yes. Next one, Don?
Alice's parents are quite wealthy.
Yep, lucky Alice. Next one, Kyle.
The crime of robbing the Key West convenience store wouldn't be completely out of character for Alice.
Wait a minute, you skipped over something.
Oh, wait.
Alice's parents are quite wealthy.
Oh, sorry. Alice's personal checking account contained over $8,000 on the day of the robbery.
Yeah, at the time this was came up with, that might be seen as a chunk of change, but it's probably getting less significant.
Shouldn't you change the day of the robbery to August 9th?
Yes, you probably should. That's true. But if you didn't, because I didn't, you get away with it. All right, number 7, Eric.
Such a crime would be committed out of character for them.
Be completely. Now, I'm going to object to such a crime. Why? Because I'm a jerk.
What crime?
Yeah, we do in fact know what crime it is from elsewhere, and it is,
Robbery.
yeah, armed robbery of a convenience store. Yeah, so I'm going to just say armed robbery would be completely out of character for the defendant Alice.
Would it be out of place to put such a crime?
Yes, that's a borderline one. If you did, it depends how generous I was feeling. It's probably half a point.
Alright, so just get in the habit of that.
Yes, get in the habit. Next one, Brian.
Alice is gentle.
Now, yes, here's a judgment call. It says Alice is a gentle, non-violent individual. Now, should we separate those out? Again, the way to think about it is, are these separate and distinct qualities that we're going to have separate and distinct evidence in support of? So this is a claim that is going to be supported by evidence. Is there going to be distinct evidence for the fact that she is gentle from the evidence that she is non-violent? And actually, you might be able to make a case for this. For example, it talks about her being a Meals on Wheels volunteer. Maybe that proves that she's gentle. And then it says she doesn't like guns. Maybe that proves that she's non-violent. Now, she prefers knives. So you could make a case for this, but I'm going to treat them as the same, just because otherwise we'll get 500 propositions here. But if you separated them out, then I certainly wouldn't object. That's okay. But sometimes you don't have to. Like in the case of Michelangelo, Leonardo, or Donatello, turns out the evidence that showed that it wasn't one of them proved it for all of them, so you didn't have to separate them out. So I'm just going to think. And why is this? Why isn't there a precise argument? Because this is the kind of argument that people might give in real life, and people aren't really that exact, right? I mean, this is useful. It's useful training to analyze arguments, and it's useful training for all kinds of skills. But one in particular would be, for example, a lawyer. And suppose someone was cross-questioning a witness and said, "Wait a minute. You say gentle, non-violent. Do you mean those as two distinct things?" Probably the person would say, "I don't know," right? Because people don't actually think too much about what they're saying. So, in some respects, it's a little artificial to impose too rigid a logical structure on an argument that someone gives, because they're probably not all that clear on it themselves. But there are cases, so there are some judgment calls. But in a lot of cases, in most cases, there is a precise answer. I'm just going to say in this case, we can keep it simple. Next one, Zach.
Alice's biology professor testified that she refused to harm Frog.
Who's seen E.T.? So, it's like that. Number 10. And you.
Three of her friends testified that she's bitterly opposed to firearms.
Two of whose friends? I mean, three of whose friends?
Four friends.
Whose friends?
Alice.
Alice's. Remember, if it says her, I want you to replace with what it said. oh, we skipped over the Meals on Wheels stuff. So 10 is the director of Meals on Wheels testified that Alice has been a dedicated volunteer for the program for over 3 years. And then we get to 3 of Alice's friends testified that she is fiercely opposed to firearms. Nick?
Alice refused even to handle a gun shown by everyone.
Yeah, now you could include that under 3 of her friends testified that. But again, that's a bit of a judgment call. I did, but if you didn't, it's probably not the end of the world. Charbel?
That Alice refused even to handle a gun.
Yeah.
Alice is not the sort of person who takes a pistol into a convenience store.
Well, actually, you skipped over one thing.
Of the violent.
Yeah.
Alice won't even attend violent meetings.
Boring. Those are the best kind. Okay, yes. Now, you were starting to say the next one. Alice is not the sort of person who takes a pistol into a convenience store and robs it at gunpoint. I put a line through the whole thing. Why did I do that?
It's for your reiteration.
Yes, if one of the other things about listing propositions is you don't list 2 propositions that say the same thing. Now, why would people say the same thing? Well, often people repeat themselves for emphasis. Like I said, usually someone will say the conclusion at the beginning, but also at the end. You don't want to say it twice, because if you're listing the same proposition twice, well, it would have to go in exactly the same place on the diagram, and you can't put it in the same place, and it would create a problem. So you only want to list this different information. I'm going to say that this is equivalent to one of the ones we had previous. Which one? What was that?
7.
7. Armed robbery would be completely out of character. Yes, I think that's right. Now you could quibble. You could say, this talks about a pistol. Whereas the other one says, because you could say, Alice is not the sort of person who takes a pistol into a convenience store. She takes her trusty double-barreled shotgun, right? But I think the intent is clear, that it's meant to be that she wouldn't do anything like that. Why? Because it's completely out of character. So that's the reason I didn't include that one. All right, so what's the next one, Samantha?
Alice was not even in Key West at the time of the crime.
Yes, she's not even in Key West. All right, next one. Jordan.
Just a question.
Yes.
Didn't that say that like a pistol was what was used to shoot up the convenience store?
Yes, that's right. That's another piece of information that we haven't got. And so, all of these complications that I never really thought about. Yeah, that would be funny. Funny if the prosecution said, "Wait a minute! I never said it was a pistol. Aha! You must have been the one who did it." Yeah, we'll ignore that. Okay. Something like that. You won't have one this complicated on the homework, you'll be glad to hear, or in the exam. But if something like that came up, you could ask me, is this relevant? Is this something important? And I would tell you. Okay.
Alice was in Miami at 9:30 p.m. on August 9th.
Yes, indeed. Ken? No, it doesn't say that.
Miami is at least an hour's drive from Key West.
There you go. It shouldn't say and hours, it should say and. An, not and. So apart from that. Chris?
We know Alice was an Miami because a professor from the University of Miami testified that he saw her in a line to go to get popcorn at the movie theater.
Yeah, notice I've put a line through, we know she was in Miami because. And the reason why I've done that was, we already have stated here that she was, so we don't need to repeat it in this case. And what this is going to be is this is going to tell you that number 17 leads to number 17 leads to 15. Because number 15 says that she was in Miami. And this says we know that because, so in other words, this is going to be a premise for number 15. So all of that is giving us information about the structure of the diagram. So it's going to affect the diagram, but it doesn't add extra information to the content. The new stuff is a professor from the University of Miami testified that he stored in line popcorn, blah, blah, blah. Let's just race to the end. The professor from the University of Miami recognized Alice from 2 seminars. Finally, there is no way that Alice could have committed this crime. Now, and I put a line through so you see that. That's another indicator phrase. Look at number 19, bless you. Look at number 19 and number 2. Are they repeating themselves? Because if they are, you only need one of them. Or if there's a difference, what's the difference?
Between the statement that she did not and the statement that she didn't have the ability.
One is saying it's impossible, one is saying she did not.
And what's the difference? Which one supports what? Yes, so one says she did not, and the other says she could not. And there is a difference, you're right. Which would support which?
She could not would support she did not.
Why not the other way around?
Because there's support for why she could not.
Well, but suppose I only had 2. I said, I could not do the crime, I did not do the crime. Why is it could not supporting did not rather than the other way around?
Because could not.
If you can, could not proves beyond all doubt that you did not, right? But if you did not, that doesn't prove that you could not. Why not?
Because you could do something.
Yeah, I mean, suppose there's 10 people surrounding someone, and the 10 people all have guns, and one of them shot that person. Now, suppose it wasn't me. So I did not. But does that prove that I could not? No, I was standing when they were a gun. I could have done, but I didn't. Whereas if I couldn't, that proved that I didn't. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, so this is could not. So 19 supports 2, not the other way around. All right? Could not supports did not. Now, in the, I'll give you 2 minutes to diagram it. Yeah, I'm kidding. This is going to be big and ugly, but, bless you, it makes people sneeze, it's so ugly. But it can be broken down into bite-sized chunks. What do I mean?
Anything that deals with monetary could be part 1.
Yes, so you can just say, okay, I'm just going to focus on, see, remember this says in the first place. So this is talking about one type of reason. So 3 goes with what else?
1 and 2.
Well, 3 is going to eventually support 1 and 2, but if we say after 3. 4, 5, and 6. After that point, we're getting to, so this is no motive, this is character issues. So 7 goes with down to here. And then this is location. So that goes with that. So you can break it up into 3 sections. Let's very briefly diagram the first of those.
Start with 9.
Well, she had no motive. Why did she have no motive? Because she didn't need money. So 4 goes to 3. How do we know she didn't need money? Her parents are rich. Are those dependent or independent? Independent, that's right. So there, we've already diagrammed 4 of them just like that. And they form a sort of separate, now this is going to eventually tie in. She had no motive, that would prove, that would show, probably go directly to she did not rob it. It wouldn't go to she could not. Because if you have no motive, that doesn't prove that you couldn't do it. But it might prove that you didn't. Doesn't even do that, but you know. Alright. It's probably intended to do that. Okay, and then you can do the rest in your spare time, because I'm sure you'll want to. But now, don't put anything away in a minute that remains. I want to introduce you to something That will be on the homework, which I'll post tomorrow, and we'll finish talking about next time. But at least you know what it's asking. And this is what are called in the book implicit premises, also called implied premises, sometimes called missing, sometimes called assumed, sometimes called unstated. They're all the same thing. And these are their propositions that are not included in the argument as presented, but they are essential to make it work. Now, I haven't spelled out exactly what make it work means. We'll talk about that next time. But let me give you an example. If you look at, yes, practice quiz 5.6 on page 115. Tom is a very successful salesman, so he must be an outgoing person. How many propositions are there? How many? 2. What's the conclusion? Who? Tom is an outgoing person. That's the conclusion. So if you just diagram the ones as they were stated there, you would say 2 is the conclusion, Tom is an outgoing person, and then you would say, what's your evidence? What's the answer given here? He's a successful salesman. But that doesn't guarantee it unless we have an extra assumption. So we could say, so suppose you said he's a successful salesman, and then I said, so what? And in fact, the question, so what, is how you get at missing premises. You ask, so what, and the answer will be the missing premise. So, Tom's an outgoing person. What's your evidence? He's a successful salesman. So what?
He should be outgoing to be a successful salesman.
Yeah, or all successful salesmen are outgoing. That's the missing premise. Now, in most cases, you think, well, it's missing because it's freaking obvious, right? People who can't be bothered to say it. But in many cases, it will turn out to be the weak link in someone's argument. And there's a reason why they haven't said it. It's because they don't want you to notice that their whole argument relies on that. So all missing premises are dependent premises. That's how you know it's missing, because the one premise that they have given doesn't work by itself. And of course, we know that when you hop over a plus, which is a sign of a dependent premise, you ask, so what? All right, we'll talk more about that next time.